What if a single rainy night could change the course of 3 lives forever? In the heart of Seattle, a storm raged, drowning the city in darkness. From the backseat of a luxury car, a powerful CEO looked out at the blurred skyline haunted by a past he never speaks of. Then he saw her. A little girl, barefoot and shivering under a broken bus stop, clutching nothing but a thin blanket against the cold. She had no home. Her mother was fighting for her life in a hospital bed. And in that moment, this man, who had everything money could buy but nothing his heart truly needed, made a choice. A choice that would break open his silence, reshape his future, and give a lonely child a reason to believe again. Stay with us, because this is not just a story, it's a reminder of the power of staying, of choosing love, and of never walking away. Subscribe to Loss and Healing. The storm had taken the city as if it wanted to erase it from the earth. Sheets of rain hammered down on the glass towers, blurring them into a gray watercolor. Gavin Whitmore leaned forward in the backseat of his town car, his chin resting against his knuckles. He was not a man who usually lingered on the weather, but tonight, the storm spoke to him in ways he had not allowed himself to hear in years. Each crash of thunder echoed with memories he had locked away. The driver shifted nervously as they crawled through traffic. Gavin had asked him to take the long way. No explanation, no need. October 17th was a date burned into his bones. The night his sister had slipped from this world and left him alone in its silence. Every year the air grew sharp, the trees shed their leaves, and his body remembered what his mind tried to bury. He stared at the streaks of water racing down the window, the city lights smeared together like tears. Even the sky cannot hold it together tonight, he thought, folding his arms. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was the master of control in every boardroom, every deal. Yet inside, he carried a storm no one could see. Then something broke through. A flicker of movement, faint against the torrent. Gavin sat upright. "Stop," he said, sharper than intended. The driver pulled to the curb. Gavin's eyes fixed on a small figure huddled beneath a crooked bus stop awning. At first he thought it was a bundle of clothes tossed aside. But as the headlights cut through the rain, he saw her. A child, 6, maybe 7. Her blanket clung to her body like soaked paper. Bare feet pressed against the pavement, raw and red. Wet hair plastered to her cheeks. She sat with her knees drawn to her chest, her back stiff in a defiance that looked far too old for her little frame. Gavin's chest tightened. A child, alone in this storm. His hand found the door handle. The driver turned toward him. "Mr. Whitmore, should I?" "No, stay here." Gavin pushed the door open and stepped into the downpour. His tailored wool coat darkened instantly. Umbrella in hand, he walked carefully toward the girl. "Hey there," he said, steady but soft, his voice competing with the roar of rain. The child flinched, clutching the blanket tighter. Her eyes lifted to his dark, wide, full of fear that no child should have to know. Gavin froze, caught in the weight of that look. The world had already shown her cruelty. He crouched low, careful not to intrude. "I'm not here to hurt you. My name's Gavin. I just want to help. Do you have someone I can call? Your mom? Your dad?" The word mom cracked her lips. She pressed her face to her knees. "I can't," she whispered, voice barely there. "Mommy said don't go with strangers." "She's right," Gavin answered gently. "That's very smart of her. But it's cold. It's late. And you're all alone." The girl's eyes flicked to the umbrella, then to the waiting car. Still silence. Rain filled the space between them. Gavin stayed crouched, knees aching, waiting for her to choose if she'd let him stay near. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked softly. A pause. Then, like a secret, surrendered, "Lena." "Lena," he repeated. "That's a beautiful name. Okay, Lena, I won't make you do anything, but can you tell me where your mom is?" Her fingers twisted the edge of the blanket. Her throat moved as she swallowed. "She's in the hospital." Something twisted inside Gavin. "What hospital?" "I don't know the name. It's big, with white walls. I was there earlier. They made me leave." "Why?" His voice caught more emotion than he intended. "She's in the ICU. Visiting hours ended. They don't let me stay. So I waited outside, but I got cold." She spoke without self-pity. Just the weight of a child telling a truth no child should have to live. Gavin felt a knot tighten in his chest. "You don't have anywhere else to go?" She shook her head. "Mommy was all we had." Her words pierced deeper than the rain. He saw her as she was, trembling, soaked, yet holding herself with a strength far too heavy for her small shoulders. A child trying not to crumble. Gavin reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a business card, and placed it gently on the bench. "This is my card. I'm not asking you to trust me, but I live close. We can call the hospital together. You can get dry, warm, and tomorrow we'll find your mom." Lena stared at the card like it was written in a language she didn't know. He tried again. "I have hot chocolate," he added softly. Her lips trembled. Her voice cracked. "She's all alone in there, and I'm all alone out here." Gavin stood, umbrella over her small frame. "Then let's not be alone anymore." For a heartbeat, nothing moved but the storm. Then Lena slowly rose to her feet. Her blanket slipped, heavy and soaked, but she grabbed it before he could. Bare feet slapped against the wet concrete as she stepped toward his car. Gavin opened the door. She climbed in without a word. As he closed it behind her, Gavin felt the storm still raging above. But inside the car, a new vow formed within him. A vow he never thought he would make again. "I'm not walking away." The elevator opened with a quiet chime, spilling soft light onto Gavin Whitmore's penthouse floor. Sleek, immaculate, and cold, the space stretched outward like a gallery that had never been lived in. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed Seattle's skyline blurred with mist and rain. Not a pillow out of place, not a speck of dust visible. It was the kind of home people admired from afar but never imagined filling with laughter.
I'm really sorry about
Lena
that.
stood just beyond the threshold, dripping from the storm. She didn't move forward. The oversized doorway swallowed her small figure. Her tangled hair clung to her face. Her blanket dripped onto the polished marble. She looked at everything as if she'd stepped into a world that didn't belong to her. "Come in," Gavin said, setting the umbrella aside. His own voice sounded foreign in the vast silence. "Make yourself at home." The words felt hollow even to him.
Can I stay the
He
night,
hadn't
please?
realized until this moment how little home this place actually
safe here.
was. It was a fortress of order, built to keep chaos out, built to keep memories in. Lena hesitated, then shuffled one step forward. Each bare footprint bloomed against
You're
the
not
floor,
bothering me at all.
tiny puddles that disappeared almost as quickly as they came. Gavin noticed, and though his instinct was usually to have every mark cleaned, tonight he felt something stir like
This will be
those
your guest
small
Thank
traces
you.
of another life were exactly what this space had been missing. He crouched down, softening his voice. "Would you like something warm to drink? Hot chocolate, maybe?" Her eyes flicked up, cautious but curious. She gave a small nod. He gestured toward the kitchen. "This way." The kitchen was as spotless as the rest of the penthouse, appliances gleaming like they'd never been touched. Lena followed slowly, each step deliberate, her eyes scanning every corner like a bird, ready to flee if the wrong shadow moved. Gavin pulled out a chair, and after a long pause, she climbed onto it, still clutching her soaked blanket like armor. "I'll find you something dry to wear," he said. His voice was calm, steady. Though
You'll come back in the
inside he
morning,
felt
right?
strangely unsteady himself. He disappeared into the hallway closet and returned with a white t-shirt and drawstring pants his own, far too big, but clean and soft. "You can change in the bathroom down the hall," he offered gently. "Towels are on the shelf." She didn't speak, but after a moment she rose and padded silently down the hall. The door clicked shut behind her. Gavin let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He leaned against the counter, staring out at the rain streaking the windows. The storm outside felt familiar, chaotic, relentless. Inside his chest, the same. But the faint scent of wet fabric lingered, reminding him of years he had tried to bury. A memory surfaced, himself at 7 years old, locked outside in a thunderstorm by a drunk stepfather. His body shivering, his small fists pressed to the door no one opened. The porch smelled of mildew, and the storm seemed endless. No one came for him. Not that night, not ever. He pushed the memory away, pressing his palms to the cool granite counter. But it clung, the way storms always do. The bathroom door opened softly. Lena emerged in the oversized clothes, sleeves and pant legs bundled around her. She carried her wet pajamas in a neat bundle, hugging them to her chest. Gavin took them gently from her hands and set them aside for the laundry. "Better?" he asked. She gave a tiny nod, her face half hidden by damp strands of hair. He slid a steaming mug toward her across the counter. Marshmallows floated on top, beginning to melt into white swirls. She wrapped both hands around the cup as if it were treasure, blew lightly across the surface, and took a sip. Thank you, she whispered. Gavin's throat tightened. You're welcome. Silence filled the kitchen again, but this time it wasn't sharp. It was fragile, tentative. Gavin leaned back, arms crossed, studying her small frame. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the cup. He didn't know if it was from the cold or from something deeper. What's your favorite color? He asked suddenly, surprising himself. Lena blinked, then murmured, Purple. Mommy likes green. He allowed a faint smile. Good choices. They fell quiet again. She sipped carefully, her tiny shoulders still tense. Then her voice came, barely above a whisper, Is it okay if I stay here tonight? Gavin straightened. The question cut through the air, sharp and vulnerable. Of course, he said. You'll be safe here. She seemed to sag just slightly in relief, though she tried to hide it by lowering her gaze into her mug. Mommy says we shouldn't bother people. She always says we'll be fine.
Are you lost?
You're not bothering me, Lena, Gavin said gently. Her lips pressed together, as if she wanted to believe but wasn't sure she could. When she finished the cocoa, he led her to the guest room. It was as pristine as every other Space League bedding, untouched linens, more pillows than necessary. Lena lingered at the doorway, her hand gripping the frame as though afraid to step into something too perfect. Would you like to leave the door open? Gavin asked. She nodded. He turned down the bed and laid a folded blanket at the foot. I'll be in the room down the hall, he said. Call out if you need anything. Lena climbed onto the bed carefully, pulling the blanket under her chin. Her gaze drifted toward the rain tapping softly against the glass. Will you come back in the morning? She asked, her voice so faint it might have vanished if he'd looked away. He paused. No one had asked him that in years not friends, not partners, not family. He took a slow step closer, crouched beside her bed. I'll be here, he said, voice steady. I promise. Her eyes searched his face for something she couldn't name. Trust, truth, a reason not to be abandoned again. She gave the smallest nod and turned her face toward the pillow. Gavin stood a moment longer, listening to her breathing grow steady.
I am staying.
Then he pulled the door until it was slightly ajar and walked down the hall. In his own room, Gavin sat fully clothed on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. Tonight was never supposed to happen. He should have been pouring a glass of scotch, rereading old reports, and retreating into silence. Instead, a 6-year-old girl slept down the hall in clothes far too big for her, with no one else in the world to protect her. And for the first time in years, Gavin Whitmore didn't feel entirely alone. The morning arrived with a quiet heaviness. Mist clung to the Seattle skyline like a veil as Gavin typed a brief message to his assistant. Postpone everything today. Personal emergency. He never canceled meeting stakeholder calls, quarterly reviews, investor briefings, but none of that mattered now. A child was asleep in his guest room and her mother was lying in a hospital bed. By the time they pulled into the hospital parking lot, the fog had thinned, but the building loomed gray and tired, its faded letters barely holding on against the weather. Inside, the air was sterile, thick with disinfectant and exhaustion. Gavin had toured world-class medical centers, but this public facility whispered survival, not healing. Lena walked a step behind him, small shoulders squared as if bracing for battle. At the reception desk, Gavin said, "We're here to see Maggie Parker." The woman looked up, hesitating. Family only during morning rounds. She's her daughter, Gavin interrupted, voice calm but unyielding. Recognition flickered across the receptionist's face. She looked at Lena, then nodded. Room 204, blue elevator. They walked in silence through the corridor lined with peeling posters and vending machines that hummed louder than they should. Gavin glanced at Lena, her pace quickened as they neared the ICU, as though she already knew the path. At the doorway to room 204, she stopped, gathering her courage. Inside, Maggie Parker lay still, sunken into hospital sheets. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, machines breathing in rhythm for her. Tubes ran from her arms, a line of oxygen fed into her nose. Lena climbed onto the small stool beside the bed. She brushed her mother's hair back from her forehead and kissed the back of her hand. She hasn't smiled in weeks, she whispered. I think she forgot how. The words shattered something inside Gavin. A child shouldn't carry that weight. Not alone. A nurse entered, clipboard in hand. She froze when she saw Lena.
You'll get it right.
You're back, she said gently. Then her eyes shifted to Gavin. Are you the guardian? No, Gavin replied. Just here to help. The nurse studied him, recognition dawning when she heard his name. She looked down at the chart. Her condition is critical. Severe endocarditis. The infection has reached her heart. She needs surgery fast. We've done what we can, but no insurance, no resources." Her voice trailed off. Then, softer, "Mr. Whitmore, if there's anything you can do." Gavin didn't hesitate. "Have her files sent to University Medical. I'll arrange a private room and a consult today. I'll cover everything." He was already on his phone dialing. "Just keep her stable until transfer." The nurse blinked, startled, then nodded with a faint smile. "Yes, sir." When she left, Gavin turned back. Lena hadn't moved from her mother's side. She held Maggie's hand like it was the only anchor in the world. On the counter by the bed sat a stack of untouched paperwork. Among it, a faded photograph of Maggie and Lena, both smiling in front of a park fountain. Gavin slipped one of his business cards from his pocket, flipped it over and wrote, "You're not alone. She isn't either." He placed it gently beside the photo. Lena's eyes lifted to his, searching. He spoke quietly. "I'm not here as a CEO. I'm here as someone who's staying." She didn't answer, but her lips pressed tight, like holding back tears. Gavin stepped into the corridor, phone pressed to his ear, urgency burning through his calm exterior. Not urgency of profit or strategy, this was raw, human. "I need Dr. Sanders at University Medical," he told his assistant. "Emergency transfer. Patient Maggie Parker. Full coverage under my foundation." Within 10 minutes, arrangements were in motion. A private ambulance was scheduled. A cardiac team prepped. Gavin authorized everything without hesitation. When he returned, Lena still sat by her mother, her hand resting on Maggie's wrist. She looked up at him as he pulled a chair closer. "I talked to some very good doctors," he said. "They're getting a room ready for your mom. She'll be moved soon. They're going to help her get stronger." Lena's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," Gavin confirmed. Relief flickered across her face, though it carried sadness too, like she wasn't sure she deserved to hope. She looked down again, tracing the edge of the sheet with her finger. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the beeping of machines.
Good morning.
Then she pulled a folded piece of paper from her backpack and opened it. A crayon drawing 3 stick figures beneath a rainbow. A woman, a girl, and a taller figure with messy hair and a big smile. "Me, Mom, and Gav," she said quietly. Gavin stared at it longer than he meant to.
Everything looks
Something
stable.
in his chest ached. "It's perfect,"
Do not worry.
he whispered when
All
she
expenses
offered
are
it to
fully
him.
covered without question.
Later, when the ambulance arrived, Gavin crouched in front of Lena. "You'll ride with her. I'll meet you there." She hesitated. "Promise?" He held her gaze. "Promise!" As the doors closed, Gavin stood still, the cold air biting through his coat. The ambulance pulled away, its lights flashing faintly against the morning fog. He reached into his pocket, touched the drawing, and folded it close to his heart. This wasn't about kindness anymore. It was about a vow. And for the first time in his life, it mattered more than anything on his calendar. The ambulance's siren had long since faded, replaced by the quiet hum of machines and the steady rhythm of hospital corridors. University Medical stood taller, cleaner, sharper than the facility they had left behind. Yet Gavin barely noticed the polished walls or brighter lights. All that mattered was keeping his word. When he arrived on the pediatric floor, Lena was already seated by a window in her new chair, clutching a juice box like a lifeline. She looked up the moment he entered. Her eyes, still tired but less guarded now, softened. "You came," she said, not with surprise, but with reassurance. "I said I would," Gavin replied, setting down a small paper bag. "Apple muffins and cocoa." For the first time, her lips curved into a faint smile. Maggie lay nearby, her face pale but steadier.
Sleeping great with you here.
Oxygen tubes replaced the heavy mask. A subtle improvement, but enough to let hope slip into the room. A nurse stepped in, checking vitals with a calm efficiency. "She's responding," the nurse said, nodding toward the monitors. "It's early, but we're optimistic." Lena straightened at the word optimistic. Gavin simply said, "Keep me updated. Any expenses, anything missing, I'll cover it." The nurse gave him a look, not of obligation, but of respect. "You're not just donating, are you?" she asked softly. Gavin glanced at Lena before answering, "No, I'm just showing up." That afternoon, Lena led him to the hospital garden.
understand you're going through a
It
lot
was
right now.
modest patchy grass, a koi pond, hydrangeas struggling to bloom. She paused by the water's edge. "Mom used to bring me to places like this," she whispered. "She will again," Gavin said, though his voice was gentler than his certainty. She turned toward him, brushing damp hair from her face.
Hello.
"She used to draw
Hello.
too. Flowers, birds. She stopped. Gavin studied her small frame, the way she carried fear like a backpack she couldn't put down. I know what it's like, he admitted quietly. To lose someone. To pretend you're fine so no one sees the cracks. Her eyes lifted. Who did you lose? My sister, he said simply. A long time ago. She didn't ask more, and he didn't explain further. But something passed between them. Not pity, not comfort, but understanding. Back in Maggie's room, Lena pulled out her crayons and paper. She began to draw with fierce concentration. When she finished, she held it up. 3 windows, each labeled me, mom, and you. To Gavin, it looked like stained glass. Can I put it on the wall? She asked. Anywhere you want. He taped it above the monitor. A nurse walking past smiled at the sight. She sleeps better when you're here, she teased Gavin. I don't do much, he muttered. You're here, she said simply. That's everything. That evening, Gavin stepped into the family lounge for a call. His assistant's voice filled the line. You canceled tomorrow's schedule as well. The board is asking if you're all right. I'm fine, Gavin replied, glancing through the glass at Lena curled beside her mother. Better than I've been in a long time. There was a pause. You sound different. I'm just remembering what matters, he said before ending the call. Later that night, Gavin returned to find Lena asleep, one hand resting on her mother's. He pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders. He hadn't read any books about parenting, hadn't studied what to do, but the simple act felt instinctive. His gaze shifted to the drawing taped on the wall, the windows glowing in the dim hospital light. Home, he whispered, realizing for the first time that it wasn't marble floors or penthouse views. It was this 2 hands linked in the dark, promises kept. The days stretched into a rhythm. Gavin arrived each morning before the nurses changed shifts, bringing muffins or cocoa or juice boxes. He knew which vending machine Lena favored, which window caught the sunrise. His suits gave way to rolled-up sleeves, his briefcase replaced by sketchbooks and crayons. One afternoon, Lena showed him a new drawing. This time, 4 windows. Mom, me, Gav, us, curtains drawn back, sunlight spilling through. You gave us a place, Gavin said softly. Lena smiled, that quiet, knowing smile children have when they realize they've made something that matters. In the following weeks, Maggie's strength returned little by little, each breath steadier, each word less fragile. She would walk again, the doctor said. She would sew again. Slowly, stubbornly, she would heal. But Gavin had already been changed. The silence that once consumed him now held a different weight, not emptiness, but belonging. And though he never said it aloud, he knew. This wasn't just about keeping his promise, it was about becoming part of a family he had never thought he deserved. The day Maggie Parker was finally strong enough to leave the hospital, the air outside carried the faint warmth of early summer. It had been weeks since Gavin first stepped into that storm, weeks since a frightened little girl had climbed into his car with nothing but a blanket and trembling hope. Now, Maggie leaned on a cane, fragile but upright, her eyes brimming as she crossed the threshold into a different kind of home. Gavin had not brought them to his glass and marble penthouse. Instead, he had opened the doors to a smaller house in Magnolia, overlooking Elliott Bay. The place had wooden floors that creaked in certain corners, a backyard with overgrown hedges, and walls waiting for new life. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't sterile, it was warm. As Maggie stepped into the entryway, she froze. Hand-drawn pictures lined the walls, Lena's crayon windows, flowers, stick figures smiling beneath rainbows. The fridge carried magnetic letters spelling out "Welcome Home." On the dining table sat a vase of hydrangeas Gavin had picked up that morning. I don't know what to say, Maggie whispered, her voice shaking. You don't have to, Gavin said softly. You're home. Lena ran past them, barefoot, her laughter ringing through the hall. She darted into the room that had once stored forgotten art supplies. Now it was hers walls covered in glow-in-the-dark stars, a small desk under the window, and her drawings taped proudly in rows. Can I make it mine? She asked, eyes wide with hope. It already is, Gavin replied. That night, they ate dinner together in the backyard. Lena wore one of Gavin's oversized shirts as pajamas, swinging her legs from the chair as she spooned soup into her mouth. Maggie, still weak, laughed softly at Gavin's failed attempt to fold a fitted sheet earlier in the day. That thing wasn't made to be tamed, she teased. Gavin chuckled, defeated. That makes two of us.
So how was your day today?
The laughter that followed wasn't loud or forced. It was the kind of laughter that feels like sunlight after a long winter. Days turned into weeks. Gavin adjusted his schedule without hesitation. He declined board retreats, postponed meetings, and instead reviewed proposals from the porch while Lena painted rocks beside him. His briefcase, once filled with contracts, now carried juice boxes, sketch pads, and stuffed animals. Maggie moved slowly, still needing rest, but her smile grew stronger each day. Doctors spoke cautiously of her recovery, but Lena spoke with certainty. "She'll be fine," she told Gavin one evening as they watered the small plants by the porch. "She's strong." Gavin looked at her, at the quiet defiance in her eyes, and nodded. "She is, just like you." One afternoon, Lena unveiled a new drawing. It was another house, boxy and slightly crooked like all her others. But this one had 4 windows, each labeled Mom, Me, Gav, and one more list. Vines climbed the walls, sunlight blazed above the roof. "I wanted to make a window that belongs to all of us," Lena explained. "So we know we're together, even when we're in different rooms." Gavin knelt beside her, his throat tightening.
I love you too,
"You did more than that," he said quietly. "You gave us a place to be, together, real." Maggie's eyes shimmered as she held the drawing. "You're building something," she told Gavin. "Not just helping, building." He didn't answer. Words often failed him when people touched the rawest corners of his heart, but the truth hung between them, undeniable. Their days became stitched together with small rituals, morning muffins, Lena's whispered jokes, Maggie's slow walks in the garden. The silence Gavin once clung to was gone, replaced by something gentler. It wasn't the emptiness of loneliness anymore. It was the stillness of belonging. Sometimes at night, Gavin would pause outside Lena's door. Through the crack, he could see the faint glow of her moon-shaped nightlight, casting constellations across the ceiling. She slept soundly now, her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her arm, her breathing soft and even. And each time, Gavin felt the weight of a vow unspoken, yet lived out daily. She would never be alone again. It was not dramatic. It was not a grand declaration. It was steadier, deeper, built from every small choice to stay. One evening, as the three of them sat on the floor piecing together a puzzle, Lena pointed at the last missing piece of the sky. "We can't stop until it's finished," she insisted, her determination echoing Maggie's stubbornness. Gavin looked at her, then at Maggie beside her, and realized something. The puzzle wasn't just on the floor, it was their lives. Broken pieces slowly, stubbornly forming a picture none of them had expected. And for the first time in years, Gavin Whitmore didn't feel like a man drowning in silence. He felt like a man who had finally found his place inside a picture that had room for all 3 of them. The mornings in Magnolia began to carry a rhythm, one that Gavin had never known before. No alarms from his phone, no urgent reminders flashing across his calendar. Instead, the soft shuffle of little feet down the hallway, the scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen, and the sound of Lena's quiet humming as she watered the potted plants on the porch. 5 weeks had passed since Maggie first opened her eyes in the ICU. Her strength grew slowly, but visibly. She could manage short walks with a cane, her laughter sometimes breaking through fatigue. Each day, Gavin drove her to follow-up appointments. Lena seated in the back with her backpack full of crayons and folded drawings. The hospital staff had grown used to seeing them together. Not businessmen and strangers, but a family. At home, Lena filled walls with her art sunbursts, crooked houses, windows glowing with light. Always the windows. She taped each one with care, pointing proudly whenever Gavin entered the room. "That one's the kitchen window, that one's ours." The word ours rolled from her tongue with the ease of someone who finally felt safe. Gavin found himself leaning into the small rituals he had once ignored. Evening puzzles on the living room rug, late-night cups of cocoa, grocery trips where Lena debated the merits of blueberry muffins versus cinnamon rolls with the seriousness of a boardroom negotiation. The silence in his house no longer pressed against him. It had shifted, softened. It carried laughter, footsteps, whispers through half-open doors. One morning, Lena burst into his office clutching another drawing. "Don't peek yet," she announced, spreading it carefully on the desk. When she revealed it, Gavin stared longer than he meant to. A house again, but this time brighter, more alive. 4 windows labeled Mom, Me, Gav, Us. Curtains drawn back, vines climbing the walls, a sun blazing overhead. I wanted to make one window for all of us, Lena explained. So we're together, even when we're not in the same room. Gavin's throat tightened. You gave us more than a window, he said softly. You gave us a home. Maggie leaned against the doorframe, her cane steadying her. She studied the drawing, her eyes shimmering. You're not just helping us, Gavin. You're building something. He couldn't find words, so he just nodded, letting the truth of it settle in his chest. Evenings often ended with the three of them on the porch. Maggie wrapped in a blanket, Lena swinging her legs over the chair, Gavin sitting beside them with a quiet contentment he never thought possible. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they simply watched the sun fade over Elliott Bay. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was full of presence, of promises kept, of love unspoken but deeply felt. One night, Lena leaned against Gavin's shoulder, her voice small but steady. Do you think we'll always stay together? The question struck him harder than any business deal, sharper than any loss he had endured. He wrapped an arm around her. Yes, he said, as long as you'll have me. She didn't answer, only tucked her fingers into the fabric of his sweater and closed her eyes. That small gesture spoke louder than words. Later, after carrying her to bed, Gavin paused in the doorway. The glow of her nightlight painted stars across the ceiling. On her desk sat a new drawing 3 windows, with one labeled Ours, curtains fluttering as if caught by a breeze. He turned off the hallway light and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet wash over him. He had spent years believing silence was his only companion. But now, silence had changed. It wasn't loneliness, it was belonging. Maggie often joined him in the evenings after Lena had fallen asleep. Sometimes they sat in the living room, paging through old albums Gavin had pulled from storage. She stopped once on a photo of his sister, smiling by a lake. She was beautiful, Maggie whispered. She was everything, Gavin answered, his voice low. They didn't need to say more. Some things lingered best in silence. One evening, Maggie reached across the coffee table, her hand trembling but steady enough to cover his. You saved her, she said. You saved my daughter. Gavin shook his head. No, he whispered. She saved me first. The truth hung in the room undeniable. Weeks blurred into a tapestry of small moments stitched together, meals, laughter, drawings, gentle arguments over puzzles. Maggie grew stronger, Lena braver, Gavin softer. The life he had once built from glass and steel now pulsed with something far rarer, warmth. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't grand, it was real. And as Gavin stood one night at the window, moonlight spilling across the glass, he understood something he had never dared to believe. He hadn't just found a family, he had found his way back to himself. There are stories that entertain, and then there are stories that leave a mark, carving themselves into the heart because they speak to something all of us know too well: the ache of loneliness, the fear of loss, the fragile hope that someone might choose to stay. Gavin's journey was not about wealth, power, or the titles that once defined him. It was about a vow, whispered in the middle of a storm: I'm not walking away. Through Lena's small hands and her brave drawings of windows, we are reminded that love is not grand speeches or perfect timing. Love is presence. Love is showing up when it would be easier to leave. It is folding a blanket over a child in the dark. It is sitting silently beside a hospital bed. It is holding on long enough for hope to return. Maggie's slow recovery, Lena's laughter filling spaces once consumed by silence, and Gavin's steady decision to remain beloved paints a truth that transcends circumstance. Family is not always born. Sometimes it is chosen, built one small promise at a time. And those promises, when kept, become the foundation of a life worth living. We all carry storms inside us. We all know what it feels like to stand at a window and wonder if anyone sees us. But stories like this remind us that compassion has the power to break through the rain, to light even the darkest nights. Staying is harder than walking away, but staying is what saves us. So if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of the power of kindness, of the courage it takes to love, of the beauty of belonging, I ask you to keep walking with us. Because here, on this channel, we share more than stories. We share reminders that healing is possible, that connection is real, that loss does not have to be the end. Subscribe to Loss and Healing today, not just to hear another story, but to carry these truths into your own life. Together, we can keep the lights glowing in the windows of our shared humanity. Together, we can remember what matters most.